Hey everyone, and welcome to the first edition of Study Like a Pro. Today I'm going to be going over my favorite technique for studying Ignition cash games, which is the Clairvoyant review. Essentially, what you do, if you're not familiar, you go to Account, Hand History, pick your format, open it up so you can see the hands, and there'll be a download button here. Download the hands, toggle back and forth, waiting a little bit, they'll download. Just find the folder that Ignition is downloading to, which, if you don't know, you can find by opening the file, clicking File, Save As, and it will show you your path. And put those to a compatible hand history viewer like Hold'em Manager 3, and you'll be able to see the showdown of everyone involved in a hand, like so. So what I use this for is to be checking my intuition against reality. If I make any big fold that feels like it's a deviation from my standard game plan, I sort of want to see how accurate I'm being. For example, if I'm hero folding a lot of rivers, I might do a review where I faced a river bet and folded, and I'll be checking like, okay, are my folds actually making me money or costing me money? What in my thought process is leading me to fold, and are those assumptions accurate? You can run it for any line, any spot though. Like if you want to see what are people check raising me with, is it solid? You can sort of go two paths for that. You can either get a very large database and see what people are doing on average, like statistically, or the beauty of Ignition is that while you might not have a really large sample in the population, everyone's anonymous, you can actually see every single hand you played and see if people are showing up with what you think. You can do things like review what are people four betting me with, what are people folding when I'm bluffing, and that just opens up a lot. You got to be careful of confirmation bias. Like just because you folded doesn't mean you were right, because obviously people can always have a spectrum of hands. So due to pot odds, if you face a half pot bet on the river, you only need to be winning 1 in 4 times to be breaking even. So if you can call and 26% of their range is losing to you, that's a winning call. So you do have to be cautious of folding and looking at results to reinforce that. Because basically, if someone bets on the river, they usually have a value hand just because of how ranges work. They are meant to have less bluffs than value the vast majority of the time. So if you're just looking it up, you're checking your folds, and you're like, yeah, like more than half the time they have it. They usually have it. My folds are good. That's actually a mistake. You should usually be calling and losing. So what it's for is for checking your thought process on the whole. And the bigger the sample, the better. But you can also just scratch your curiosity, make sure you're not being run over, or more importantly, confirming if you are being run over and you just need to be making a stand. I've caught myself so many times over the years being absolutely sure that villain played a hand a certain way, that they had a certain hand, that population was or wasn't doing a certain thing. And sometimes I'm right, but sometimes I get shown the exact opposite. And with that contrary information, like directly face to face with it, I was sort of forced to change my perspective. And that's how I make more and more accurate decisions. I come up with a hypothesis and I test it any way I can. So over time, looking at how the pool's actually playing, how I'm actually playing, learning how theory's playing, and sort of comparing all these things, like if they bluffed me there, is that a standard bluff or are they over bluffing? And how are people managing to over bluff? What do they have to do to under bluff? Looking at all of the components that make it hard to play balanced poker, and looking for spots where people are either intentionally exploiting me or just making fundamental mistakes. Here I open ace 2 suited, face a 3-bet. This is actually a bit loose of a call in general. You fold a bunch of suited ace-x in position, not all of them. You can make up for that EV loss if you feel you have like a positional advantage, like just a post-flop advantage, but it gets pretty close to begin with. So pull that up in the solver too. So here in GTO Wizard, yeah, cutoff is actually folding like a bunch of these suited ace-x. So got to be careful that I'm not just calling all of those. That's an example of a leak you can just find by pulling this up and checking. This isn't to say you shouldn't call it. This is to say that if you're calling it, know that you're calling wider than theory, assuming they're using this 11 big blind size. So we get to the flop. They bet about quarter pot, 1/3 pot. And I call. 7 of club turn, they check. I check back, and river they overbet. And I've hit the full house, so I'm shoving for value and they fold. This looks wide. I assume that they're meant to be doing this with blockers only. And if they bluff every hand like this, they're actually overbluffing. So that's the sort of thing I can check here. A bit small, I call. 7 of clubs. They check. See what our strategy is, but I've got a pretty good idea. Like, this hand can just bet or check. Treating it like ace-3 suited, because that's what I'm allowed to have. They're mostly checking. You're not ahead of that much. You don't want to get check shoved on. We hit the full house on the river. They're not really meant to be overbetting. They do a tiny bit of shoving, but they're mostly doing like smaller bets so that they can actually value bet super thin. So like, they bet small with hands like ace king, ace queen, and even ace jack. If they do something like just betting big with their nuts and betting small with, say, these non-nut hands, that makes them vulnerable to check raises and stuff, at least in theory. Who knows what people are doing in practice? You can only really speculate. But if they are going to be going for overbet, bluff sizing, it's just done with some of the nuts they get here with 10-9 if they've got it, and king-queen with the blocker, basically. And these like low pocket pairs with flush blockers mostly. Not exclusively. So that's indicating that like their hand is at least out of construction. So my perception was like, I'm just going to call like kind of balanced here anyway. I think people are capable of bluffing me, so I'm not going to make any like hero folds really. If I would have faced this action, and this has confirmed it. So a take home would be if you just read, if you're playing in this pool, so like 1K and L ignition, and you view this line as just purely nutted, it's probably a misperception. So there's at least evidence here that there's at least one player who's just disregarding their hand categories altogether. And if you can find systematic imbalances like that, that's where you get the real edge. So if I was someone who was viewing overbets as very strong, I could say, look at every hand where I face an overbet on the river and see how are people actually constructing range. And that's not going to prove anything like conclusively, like statistically with some high confidence interval. But if you fit that into your understanding of theory, your perception of the pool, you put all these pieces together, it can guide you just like closer to what's really going on. So big takeaways from that hand. I'm not going to go into the solver if I think I've mostly played fine and there's not a lot to articulate, like do it as I would usually study. We check, they half pot multi-way, which again, can't put that into this solver. I check raise a size. On the turn now, I think I'm mostly betting small or checking. I actually looked that up, and you have to be betting like at least half pot on the turn just because you don't want to give their flush draws that good of a price if you're betting small. But I check. This hand pretty much pure bets, but I think check plays fine in practice and it's kind of close. And then happen to hit the straight flush, and check shove is standard, and they have a surprisingly easy fold. They really want to be beating flushes, and having the jack of hearts is terrible. You know, they block all my jack X flushes. If I have like jack 6, jack 8 of hearts, they really need those in range because I'm repping a whole bunch of like full houses and nut flushes now. They pretty much can't fold, say, a king high flush if they have like a king 6. There obviously they block some straight flushes and they beat queen high, jack high flushes. Same with like the nut flush. They can't really bet fold those. So when I check shove, I don't have an indication that they're overfolding here. It's just a kind of normal hand, but it does prove that people are at least capable of thinking on the level of what do I actually beat here, which isn't surprising for high stakes poker. But if you have some absolute thought in mind, like they're never going to fold a flush, not true. Here, fish limps, reg ISOs, I call, they call. keep in mind, we don't know their hands, we're in dark. You can also turn it off and then turn it on at your leisure. Checks around. I go for the check raise. Fish folds, so 2 regs here now. Already I'm thinking, what's their range? Like, what do they bet call here with? I think it's pretty strong. This guy's bet large into multiple people and then called a raise. So I think he's mostly got strong flush draws, pair plus draws. The occasional set himself and like 2 pairs. So like ace 3 plus, straights he has 7-6 as a combo draw. And maybe some like queen high, king high flushes. And similar story for this guy. Flush comes in on the river. Odds that one of them doesn't have a flush is quite low. Odds that either of them has a worse hand that would call if I shove, also very low. Especially because 7-6 actually got there now. So what could I possibly be bluffing with? If I'm bluffing, I'm actually trying to get them to fold straights, low flushes, sets, 2 pair, all possible hands, but into 2 opposition, especially this guy who's ISO'd, this guy's used a large size, I'm not confident in that. So I'm just checking, praying we show down, check, check, this guy shoves. What can he be bluffing? There's really not much. Is he going to shove worse for value? Again, it just doesn't seem likely from a thinking player. I could believe he's even checking back some of his worst flushes. I could believe he's checking back a hand like 6-7 if he got there. So we fold, other guy folds. And it's the nut flush. I had ace 3. Makes sense. And part of the beauty of recording your live sessions with thoughts, which is something that I'm just naturally doing with streaming now, but I also used to do before privately and just not broadcast it, is you can sort of hold yourself accountable to your thought process. You can check, like, am I ranging people correctly, at least in broad strokes? Are there points where I'm ignoring parts of their range, or I'm ignoring some factor that's actually leading to how I'm meant to be playing here? And again, just like check expectations with reality. That can be especially helpful with fish, where you're trying to put them on a specific range and you realize that they're just going to surprise you time and time again. This hand's a good example of that. So I've isolated king queen suited against under the gun limper. He calls with 8-4 suited. I already knew this guy was a very spewy player between these stats and some of the hands we'd seen, and this reflects that. So I bet half pot he calls with just a dominated gut shot. He could literally be dead here on the flop very easily, and it's obviously very thin. He's next to dead here because if a 9 comes in, I have the better straight. So check. I check turn because I think they have a bunch of jacks, but more importantly, I think they have a wide range of crappy hands like this that I really want to bluff into me. I also don't think it's super easy to get 3 streets. He's not going to fold a queen, might not fold a 10, but it's more important to keep his wide range of basically 0 equity hands in to bluff into me. So I check, he bets half pot, and against this sizing, I decide to just like click it back, try to get value from a worse queen, a 10, like a random pair. I think if he's hit something like a 5, he probably actually won't fold it all that often, just due to sentimental value, and get the fold. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So this reg limps queens, interesting. So I ISO. Bet small on the flop. They call. Check turn. They go large. It's really interesting because it looks like they're like trying to mimic a fish or something. Because this is quite a big sizing. I don't know what's actually meant to like happen in limped pots, so I can't speak to it too much. But I call, and then they pot river. So it's pretty interesting. It does look like they're trying to subvert what might happen if I was a reg who was playing against a fish. Because if I'm against a fish, I'm going to bet a lot of my kings, like 3 streets for value, and I'm going to be pretty sticky with my bluff catches. So like if I have a 10 against a fish, I'm never folding. Same if I have like jacks, even pocket 9s. I'd be bet, call, and then calling again. But I noticed that they were a reg, so this was pretty suspicious to me, and I found the fold. But that's part of the beauty of Ignition. Like, what the hell is a reg doing limping? I've been seeing like a bit of it, and Now I know. Open ace-5. I check back this flop. I think it just has pretty decent playability. Also just like bet range or whatever. On this turn, this board is still favoring me, even though I've checked. So out of position is meant to be checking the vast majority of the time, like 80, 90%. So when they do bet, it's mostly a large sizing. They pot, and I call. This is actually already close because, again, what they're repping here, it's mostly equity-driven bluffs, strong ace-x plus. So this is a pure bluff catcher already at this point. I do like having the ace of hearts blocker in an eventuality like this. So they pot, I just block the nut flush. I think they're capable of bluffing, and I go for a rip. And this is a profitable play in theory. It's like really close. I'll actually pull this one up. It's a pretty sweet hand. But the key here is I can turn most of their flushes into bluff catches. I'm not going to be expecting them to fold like a king high flush, probably not a queen high flush very often. But if they have any of the worst ones, sure. They also could be bluffing. They could also be playing a hand like king queen this way, given that I checked flop and I don't have that many like flush draws. So let's see what's actually happening. This is GTO Wizard, by the way. It's just a fantastic like library of solves, very thorough, quite quick. Runs in your browser. You can like full screen it for that view. So they call, and it was like ace 10 4. Yeah. Ace 10 4. They check. We mostly bet, but check is cool. It's pretty much a mix. Turn is jack of clubs. We were expecting that out of position is mostly going to check. If they do bet, it'll usually be for a big size. Issue with the library is bet sizes are pre-inbuilt, so if they aren't using one in there, you're going to have to just like extrapolate and sort of use common sense. Yeah, so they bet a little bit tiny, a little bit medium, and mostly large. So I think overbet's the closest size. We can also see what they're doing with 7-6 of hearts specifically. They're checking it a bunch or just, betting it for any size. The overbet can see ace-5 actually starts folding sometimes. But there's a clear EV gain to calling with the heart, and I think it's even better in practice. River is the 3 of hearts. Big blind on the heart close is following through with their entire range. This makes a lot of sense because this is just going to improve their equity overall. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. So big blind overwhelmingly has the best hands, 51.3% compared to 12.9%. Their equity is just way ahead. They have way more flushes. They have way more 2 pairs. And we, the cutoff, have way more trash hands. Yeah. The exact definitions of this aren't super clear to me, but something like even like most 2 pair have fallen massively in value. We have a lot of single pair hands, weak ace-x. All of those are just doing awful now. They've got 64% equity compared to 36% equity, far higher EV just because of what's going on. So yeah, they follow through with the whole range basically just for that reason. So they bet pot size, and how good is raising. With our blockers, I think it's pretty good, especially because, like actually, what do they even bet for 19? This is important. Are they betting worse than flushes for value? They're bluffing king 9. They're actually bluffing some king jack with the blocker. They are betting some king queen. Who knows if it's even more in theory. And like mostly these nut flushes. these type of flushes. They bet 19. They'll look at EV2, not just frequencies. So we've got a pretty profitable call. Not going to get too deep in the woods. Like, we have the ace of hearts. The other things are really, really subtle combinatorics that, first of all, don't directly apply in practice because no one's playing the exact PO ranges. So these subtle blocker effects are just really not worth thinking about. They're also impossible almost to apply, even if you are capable of thinking on that level. So yeah, mostly calling. Certain combos find raising profitable. So if they're overfolding pretty much at all, then raising is going to do really well because of the blocker effect. It raises a lot of ace 8, ace 9 of hearts. It prefers raising those to calling. I think the 5 is doing this subtle thing where like it blocks some of their straights and therefore it likes flatting. But we go for the shove, which I think is cool. And you can see that like these low flushes are folding a bunch. They actually have to start folding these queen high flushes. They don't have those king x flushes, so yeah. They're just mix calling their flushes basically, except the king high flushes, which are pure. And that's that. So if they always fold these type of flushes, if they use different sizings with their flushes, like if they go, say, bigger with that, well, I mean, they can't have nut flushes, so that helps. But if they go like even bigger with certain flushes or like different sizes, if they bet too many king-queen type hands for value for this scheme because they think we don't have enough flushes when we check, all of those things are going to point to us being able to like exploit that range. But overall, I think it's just a kind of close but winning raise, and I would rather raise than call because I do think their sizing scheme is weighted more towards value than bluffs. Slightly. That's an assumption. But yeah, really hard to go wrong there. People are definitely capable of making big folds on boards like this, especially because, I mean, it's just really hard for me to find bluffs, right? Like, it's pretty much only hands like this, or if I had like 10 jack with the jack of hearts, those are the type of hands I'd be going with for a raise. Do we like that one? No, 10 jack with the jack of hearts, that would be not a great pure raise, so this is the pure one. It's a lot harder when you run into their nut flushes, basically. So the real sick exploits are if you actually know, like if you know they don't have nut flushes here, because they've potted and they just don't think their hand needs that much protection, so why would they use that sizing scheme? If you have like sizing or timing tells, then you can do really sick stuff with raises. But for the most part, all that is really speculative. So if you're just sticking to fundamental theory, making sure it sort of lines up, and you're doing these subtle shifts, that's going to have you very safe against the reg pool, basically. So they potted turn, I called knowing that like it's not great, but I'm doing okay, and I can probably raise on a flush close river, and it will be slightly profitable. And then I just had the guts to follow through. I think if I chickened out and called, that's probably going to be losing. But yeah, it all lined up. So deeper stuff you can do with this, you really want to filter spot by spot. In terms of quick review, my favorite thing is just to go hands where hero didn't see showdown, because then I can see what people are folding when I'm bluffing. That's probably another video I'll do. What hands people are bluffing me with, or if people are actually like showing up with strong hands in the lines that I think are strong. Pretty much just like check any assumption. You just want to like get as big a sample as you can there. So like, do I think this river bet size is strong? Do I think this turn bet size is strong? Do I think they're check raising strong or weak? Or what hands are they doing that with? And you can check. And then you can compare that with theory, and you'll see like if someone is, say, check raising a hand that never check raises, unless they have a very specific reason for it in that instance, that player at least is probably check raising far more than in theory. And if people are missing very clear check raises, they're probably under check raising. Or if they're check raising very specific hands, sometimes there are exploits you can do with that as well. And you're protected on ignition because you're anonymous. No one knows it's you when you play. But something to be aware of is that you can always look up like what are these guys doing against me, and then sort of flip that on its head. So hope this helps. Hope this gave you some ideas. Check out eqpoker.com for coaching. Links below. Also an affiliate link for GTO Wizard posted in the bio. It's 10% off your first purchase, no matter what it is, and I get 20% of whatever you pay. So helps me out. Have a good one.